This man shattered records as the third scoring option. He scored 37 on nearly 100% shooting in a single quarter. He almost finished an NBA Finals game on a torn ACL, and is the only player ever to drop 50 or more points on next to no dribbles throughout an entire game. This man is Klay Thompson, the NBA's record holder for most three-pointers in a single game. But the question is, are we remembering his prime the way we should be? Or has Klay's recent play made us forget just how awesome he actually used to be? Klay was special, and I'm about to remind you exactly why. You know what? I've sat back and stayed too quiet for too long hearing so many people talk about Klay Thompson like he wasn't one of the top 5 most explosive scorers in the entire NBA before he suffered those major injuries. I get it. The man missed nearly 1,000 days of NBA basketball, putting him long out of sight, out of mind. But man, how quickly they forget. Klay Thompson in his prime was ridiculous, but before we get there, we have to understand how it all started to come together for Klay, which reminds me, didn't we see something next to impossible back in 2015? See, the 2014-15 season was the time Klay Thompson not only began his rise as one of the best and most recognizable players in the NBA, he was becoming an all-time superstar-level talent, and more considerably, one of the best shooters to ever lace him up. On January 23, 2015, the Warriors were set to play the Sacramento Kings on their home floor. And yes, the Kings were a really bad team at the time, so most expected the high-octane Warriors offense to run them out of the building within just the first quarter. But speaking of expectation, no one on the face of the earth could have predicted that we'd watch the most historic scoring performance of all time in a mid-season, regular season game that no one would have otherwise even cared about. Something all-world, all-time happened that day that helped transform the NBA into the league we are witnessing today. What started as a typical January game between two crosstown rivals, the Warriors and Kings played a closely contested ball game entering halftime. But in the third quarter, a superhero was born. I think it was at this moment right here, even Klay knew stuff was about to go down. And the announcer's reaction to this shot by Klay still gets me to this day.
Get it to him again. He's got it. His three. Have you ever seen anything like it?
We all know that Klay Thompson scored the most points ever in a single quarter with 37. But what if I told you that Klay scored 24 points from the 4:57 mark on the third quarter until the end of the same quarter? 24 points in less than 5 minutes. That sounds even crazier than 37 points in 12 minutes. In fact, Klay was so hot that he couldn't even miss when it didn't even count.
And he's fouled, and that will be free throws.
Look at every player on Sacramento. Hands on their hips, broken, devastated, and in awe. All at the same time. The entire team couldn't believe what they were witnessing, and they were simultaneously realizing how lucky they were to be on the other end of the Klay firestorm, aka the greatest shooting quarter in NBA history. DeMarcus Cousins, sitting on the bench, has a near smile on his face like, yeah, this guy is special. Klay in the third quarter went a perfect 13 of 13 from the floor, including 9 of 9 from 3 in that quarter. You can't even do that in NBA 2K, for crying out loud. At age 25, Klay Thompson was finally getting some recognition as one of the most lethal players in the NBA. But at just 26 years old, suddenly Klay Thompson was becoming known as one of the greatest shooters of all time, with the rare ability to make more shots than dribbles. Trust me, we'll get into that a little more later. But first, in 2016, Klay Thompson was still trying to cement himself as a bona fide superstar in the NBA, with folks questioning whether he could be that consistent go-to second option next to Steph Curry in Golden State. But guess what? Klay answered that bell in a crucial Game 6 on the road with his team in a 3-2 hole. The Warriors were, of course, coming off their record-breaking 73-win season that desperately needed a championship as the finisher to validate all of the theatrics during the 82 games in the regular season. But when they lost Game 4 by a 24-point margin and went down 3-1, OKC fans let the Warriors hear it as they thought their team just shunned a 73-win team. Klay and the Warriors took note of that. Klay had a sneaky solid first half in Game 6, but it was his second half where he caught fire. After a modest 6 points in the third quarter, here came the birth of Game 6 Klay. Klay got the party started by nailing a right-wing 3 off a screen, the first of an epic 7 3-pointers he'd go on to hit in just the fourth quarter. With under 5 minutes to play in regulation, Klay drilled this deep 3-pointer at the top of the key in Russell Westbrook's face, really striking fear into the building. but Klay was only getting hotter, catching steam with every passing second. On the flip side, OKC was getting this much closer to being forced to play a Game 7 on the road in Golden State. Throats were getting tight, palms were getting sweaty, but Klay's wrist only caught more fire. That shot gave Klay his 10th three-pointer of the night and trimmed the OKC lead to 4. And then the dagger.
Thompson fires for 3. Yes!
To give him an NBA playoff record, 11 three-pointers on the night, Klay ripped the heart out of OKC by absolutely drilling a right-wing three-pointer, sealing the deal in OKC in front of a hostile crowd, and punching the Warriors' ticket to a win-or-go-home Game 7 back in Oracle Arena. Klay's reaction after hitting that dagger was elite. He exploded with energy, knowing that he was the reason the Warriors inched closer to an all-time playoff comeback. In one of the biggest games in franchise history, Klay went off for 41 points and reined in a record 11 three-pointers with 7 huge threes in the fourth quarter. Klay led the Warriors to an iconic win, and thus the birth of Game 6 Klay. At this point, the entire world was convinced that Klay was a superstar times 10. No one disputed the fact that Klay was the world's second greatest shooter, and no one would argue with you if you said that Klay was now the second best shooter in NBA history. Yet, Klay wasn't quite satisfied. So he came out one night in Chicago and decided to set the arena on fire and claimed the NBA's record for most three-pointers in a game, previously held by his running mate, Steph Curry. What makes this performance even crazier was that he came into this game in a rare shooting slump. Yes, you heard that right. To start the 2018-19 NBA season, Klay Thompson was only shooting 39% from the floor and an abysmal sub-20% from 3 through the first few games of the season. Until one night against Chicago, when Bulls fans got to witness arguably the most explosive scoring performance since the MJ Dynasty days. Klay had 6 three-pointers in only the first quarter, which was more threes than he made through the first 7 games of the season. You knew Klay was going to have that kind of night when he hit a step-back contested three-pointer in the corner to get the party started.
They're 5th in the league, making 39% from distance.
They've got several players that can knock it down.
Then he hit 3 after 3 after 3 after 3 after 3, giving him 22 points on a mind-bending 6 of 7 made three-pointers in just the first quarter. Klay pretty much ran Chicago out of the gym to start the first quarter, and it looked like the Bulls had already thrown in the towel and conceded defeat. But Klay didn't care. So in the second quarter, Klay kept firing away for 14 more points, including 4 more threes, giving him an NBA record 10 made threes in one half. This performance was so all-time that it was literally unprecedented. See, prior to this Klay performance that night in Chicago, there were only 35 times throughout NBA history we saw a player make at least 10 three-pointers in an entire game. But my goodness, Klay's performance was just the 36th time something like this happened in league history, and he did it in just one half. I don't think we can quite wrap our minds around how incredible this display was. At this point, Klay could have saved his legs for the next game. Steve Kerr could have yanked him from the game, which would have meant that Klay would miss out on the opportunity to break Steph's three-point record. But you already know this man was going for the record. In less than 8 minutes played in the fourth, Klay poured in 16 points and 4 more threes. His final three-pointers of the game gave him 52 points and an NBA record 14 three-pointers in a game. And just for those who love numbers, it's been more than 2,000 days since Klay broke the single-game record. But before we wrap up this video, I want to stick to the same season because, objectively speaking, this was the last time we saw Klay Thompson in his absolute heyday, his absolute prime, when he single-handedly used to take teams out of the game. If there were a handful of moments in NBA history a lot of us wish we could have back, many of us would have loved to see Klay escaping those 2 major injuries he suffered in back-to-back years in 2019 and 2020. But in 2019, Klay played his last game before going 941 days without playing another one. That was a hard line I just dropped, so make sure you drop a like for that. Look, it still gives me chills when I say or think that this man actually waited that long between live NBA action. But during the final NBA game of the 2019 NBA Finals, Klay Thompson nearly pulled off his heroics again. 28 points, 66% from the floor, 66% from 3, and a perfect 8 for 8 from the free throw line. Until
It's the ball. Thompson running the floor and a foul.
oh man, this hurts to watch again. The Warriors were up 83-80 with their season on the line, and if I had to guess correctly, I would have said that Klay Thompson would have brought that game home for the Warriors that night. He had 28 points with more than 2 minutes left in the third quarter. Guys, he was on his way to doing it again in a Game 6 with all the marbles pushed to the middle of the table. But at least Klay channeled his inner Kobe and marched back out to hit a couple of free throws and even ran back down on the defensive end with a torn knee. The stuff of legends. But from 2015 to 2019, Klay Thompson played about as efficient as any other all-time great NBA superstar ever. Until someone else drops 37 points in a quarter or scores 60 points with just a few dribbles, arguably no one will ever match Klay's nuclear scoring ability. Talk about catch and shoot and flick of the wrist. Is there anyone in the history of basketball that can bury a team with a three-point shooting avalanche like Klay Thompson? Still thinking? Well, you shouldn't be. Though it's been rough sledding as of late for Klay, we can't dismiss how good this man was at his peak. Did you know that Klay Thompson has 5 playoff games with at least 8 made threes? That's the most of any player in NBA history. With career averages of nearly 20 points on 41% from three-point range and 86% from the free throw line, Klay Thompson is a lock for the NBA Hall of Fame. Records, rings, razzle-dazzle in the court, Prime Klay was him.